Welcome to Witness. I'm Rida Fakhri. In the years since the attack on the World Trade Center in New York, the Twin Towers have come to symbolize the United States as it was before the assault, in all its economic might. Simon Leventhal is a local dentist, but his real passion is photography. He's traveled the globe for more than 30 years in search of the perfect photograph. But the images he most frequently sought out were on his own doorstep, capturing the days and nights of the World Trade Center just across the Hudson River. Simon took more than 50,000 photographs of the center, from its construction through its reign over Manhattan, and then after it came down. His archive evokes the majesty of the buildings and the tragedy of all those who lived and died there. Film director John Nappich sought out the haunting memories captured by the dentist from New Jersey.
My name is Simon Leventhal, and I'm a dentist. I've been practicing dentistry for nearly 45 years. I'm a general dentist.
And there is a post hole.
Although in my practice I do mainly endodontics, that's root canal therapy, the horror of dentistry. I like the people I work with, and I like the people whom I see. I have patients who have been patients of mine for 35, 37 years in some cases. That's very satisfying to me. I'm a people person.
So, we're ready for another patient.
I know many dentists who, as their hobbies, are sculptors and painters and photographers. And it seems to all tie in to our type of work. I'm tempted to say that I have an anal personality, and that works in the field as well. Well, nature animates me. There isn't any question about that. I spend a good deal of time photographing red fox in what's known as the Great Swamp. In the springtime, I go out and check the dens. I know about a dozen dens I have found over the years in an area where I photograph. This is what I'm talking about as a product of spending many, many hours in a blind waiting for the foxes or fox to come out of the den. What I know about nature has mainly come through osmosis and study. If I see a bird I can't recognize, I go to my bird books and see if I can find it in there, and then try to remember what it was for the next time I see it. Oh, beautiful. Those are male goldfinches. Those are the ones that are bright yellow. The darker ones are the females. They're getting ready to nest now, so they spend a lot of time at the thistle feeder. Yeah, I'm in New Jersey as my residence, but I've traveled fairly extensively. And as the years went by, a lot of this travel was directed towards photography. We've traveled to Europe, to Canada, a little bit in Mexico, quite a bit in the United States, and of course, Africa. Africa was a wonderful experience. The trip was timed for the migration of the wildebeest and the zebras from the Serengeti to the Masai Mara. And we saw the crossing of the Mara River. Lions, of course, big cats were a main reason that I went. Lions, leopards, and the elusive cheetah, which we were very fortunate to see. We followed a mother and her 3 kittens for 3 days. We saw her kill in order to feed her family. And I was not upset by that, as some people are, because that's what has to be. If you're going to have cheetahs on the face of the earth, they're going to have to feed their families. In my home, there's a photograph of the female cheetah with her 3 kittens that was pure serendipity. The mother had come back with the Thompson's gazelle in her mouth and posed for us, actually, where the 3 kittens looked up at her, and the prey animal and one kitten has its tongue out of its mouth, licking its chops, as it were. And that probably was one picture out of a burst of 15 or 20. If I look at the body of my work, I'm struck by the fact that people do not play a part in my photography at all. I rather photograph images, take images of scenes which don't have people in them. The animals are the subject, or the birds are the subject in that case, even an insect for that matter. Although if you're doing close-up photography, there wouldn't be any room for people in any case. If I think about it, I'm a bit more uneasy photographing people. I don't want to intrude myself or my lens on them, different from, say, Cartier-Bresson or any of the great portraitists. Yeah, now that we've come back from traveling the world, there is a subject, in fact, in my own backyard that I've been attracted to over a long period of time. I happen to think that it's the most beautiful skyline in the world. The World Trade Center always fascinated me because you could do it at any time of year, and it was always different. It was different night to night, almost minute by minute. And there were more locations from which that group of buildings could be photographed in a fascinating way. And yes, it drew me to it. I began photographing in Lower Manhattan probably within 2 or 3 years of the towers being completed. And I was always fascinated by the way not only did the light change from night to night, but it changed seasonally. It could change minute to minute if a storm was passing through. And the buildings were always canted toward the west, where they would reflect the sunlight in some fashion. In the early days, and by that I mean the early 70s to mid-70s, none of the waterfront on the New Jersey side was developed. And it was a good location for photography because the angles were correct, but it was also a good location for drug dealers. But what a raucous time that was. The drug dealers would come in by boat, by Zodiacs and small rowboats with motors on them, pull up onto the beach, do their business with the people waiting for them. They'd get back in their boats and drive off, and the people would go into their vans or cars and they'd do whatever they drug people do, and then they would drive off and we would be there photographing, not them. I would not have turned a camera on them. But to my wife's consternation, I photographed the World Trade Center almost any time that the sky looked dramatic from where I live, which is west of the Trade Center. If I could see a sunset developing, I was in the car with my cameras on my way.
We're on our way now. We're in Jersey City and heading for the skyline. There are a few clouds in the sky in the east, which is very nice because they'll turn pink as the sun sets.
Weather reports played a factor in that as well. If I heard that a storm was moving through, time to go. How often was my going down there? It was frequent. It could be as many as 4 or 5 times a week. Beautiful. If the weather fronts were coming through and I didn't have anything else pressing to do, I would put dinner off until I came back and go. It was that important to me. I probably averaged 12 times a month at the skyline. In any photo shoot, on any evening, especially when the moon was in the photograph, there was time at sunset to take a roll of film, a roll of 36, because it was all film in those days. And if I did that 4 times a week, that was over 120 photographs a week. And if I did that 2 weeks out of the month, it was nearly 200 photographs a month. That's nearly 2,500 photographs a year. And over a period of 20 years, average out to a lot of photographs, yeah.
Join me again after the break here on Witness. Welcome back to Witness. The difference between a passion and an obsession is a highly subjective thing. Simon Leventhal is a dentist from New Jersey. He's a passionate photographer who's taken 50,000 images of the World Trade Center. But can one image capture a symbol?
I believe that my original fascination with the World Trade Center came because there they were, the tallest buildings in the world at the time. The Trade Center was a fascination because of its height. It was a fascination because of the way it reflected light. It was a fascination because of the colors that it produced when it was reflecting. On the weekends, when I wasn't working, on a Saturday afternoon, for instance, I knew that the cruise ships would leave their terminals along the Hudson River, which at the time is where they were berthed, and would come down in front of the skyline, so that a photograph of the Queen Elizabeth might be possible in front of the trade centers as the ship passed out into the harbor and left New York. Tugboats passing up and down, some of them very interesting, especially the larger tugboats. Also, all kinds of things happen in the river, things you would never think about. Kayakers would go out en masse on a Saturday afternoon. Some people would take their small boats out in. Other times, I have photographs, for instance, of wave runners going across the Hudson River on a Saturday afternoon, so that you never knew what was going to happen in the river. Any time of year was showtime for the Twin Towers and Lower Manhattan. The locations were a little different. In the winter, it's best photographed from a southern location, like Bayonne. And in the summertime, it's better photographed. The angle of the buildings to the setting sun was better from a more northerly direction, which would be Exchange Place. And then in the in-between seasons, Liberty State Park was the place to be. Well, the buildings didn't move. They couldn't turn along with the sunset, so they were at a specific angle at all times to the setting sun, no matter where it was. Many people have an opinion, and I heard many people say, oh, they were just blocks of steel, in fact, in rectangular form, and it's true they were very symmetrical. But at least to me, and to a lot of other people whom I have heard speak more eloquently than I can describe them, they were an icon of the city. Their design and how they faced was not an accident. The architects ingeniously placed them where they were and as they were. And because of their relative longevity on the landscape, they were New York City. They became New York City. And they were important for that reason. And if you're in my presence, you can't call them ugly, because they never were. This photograph that I'm holding was taken on September 4th of 2001, just 7 days before 9/11. It's the last, special to me because it's the last photograph I took of the World Trade Center before it was destroyed. Lois, my wife, and I were in California and 9/11. Well, I have thoughts about not being here when it happened. And they're not, to me, pretty. They are somewhat confusing. I want to think about this for a minute. They're voyeuristic. If I'm honest with myself and I'm honest with you, they're voyeuristic thoughts. Because on top of being horrific, if I'm honest about it, it was a spectacular event. There is no question in my mind I would have dropped whatever I was doing at the moment and gone to the skyline. No question about it. I don't chase fire engines. I don't look for spectacular images where people may be hurt. It is voyeuristic. It would have been voyeuristic of me, and yet I think I would have done it. I don't think there's any question that I would have done it. So now I'm conflicted. I'm not that kind of person usually, but I would have been then if I'm honest with myself. Just like a while ago when I said to you, you can watch a cheetah chasing down a Thompson's gazelle 50 times on television, done in slow motion, far better than I could ever hope to do it. And yet, when you're there seeing it in person, that's all that matters. I don't think it was, for instance, voyeuristic for my daughter, who spent a year in Iraq, to go see what happened when a bomb went off. That wasn't voyeuristic, that was her job. She needed to see if people needed help, if her people were safe. That the people who needed to be there certainly wasn't voyeuristic for the firemen or the policemen to be there. We're there to help. And then when we returned, some 11 days later, I was unable to bring myself to go to the scene, even though I did watch it on television, even though it was still smoking. The cleanup had already begun. And finally, I felt as an obligation to myself, not to the scene, that I would go and try and make something of it that made sense to me. And instead of going to the New York side to photograph them, I stayed on the New Jersey side because I wanted to photograph this from the same locations that I had photographed it when it was glorious. And I do have photographs of the aftermath, if you will. And then when the light show appeared, I was able to photograph that from several locations. As tribute to what was. Not very long after, I went back into my archive, and I had printed for me 13 photographs which I thought exemplified the scene, the Twin Towers, Lower Manhattan, best to me. And I had them printed for me, large, 20 by 30 inches. And then, with no attempt to market these photographs at all, people began asking me whether they could have reproductions. So I began selling the photographs and donated all of the proceeds from those sales, 55 photographs in all, to the New York State Firemen's and Policemen's Fund. And at the end of that time, it really did produce a good feeling for me, a feeling that in some small measure, and it was a small measure, but in some small measure I was able to give back for all of the joy that I had received over the years. And it was a very, very poignant time for me. After a while, I think the importance of it to me was that I saw a body of work growing. I appreciated the fact that I could look back upon it and say, well, look at what we have here. It's the advantage of latching on to something that you enjoy and doing it over a long period of time, and voila, it's documented for me. Well, I think the uniqueness of it has changed in my mind. Yes, absolutely. This one, because of 9/11, has special meaning, yes. If I don't photograph bluebirds this year, I can photograph them next year. The same with most other animals. It may change, it's never the same. Nothing is ever the same. But this isn't going to ever be the same in any way, shape, or form. It's gone. And what comes in its place will establish over the years, we hope, the same kind of persona. But that's going to take time.
The iconic power of the Twin Towers ensure that even though they may no longer be a part of the New York skyline, you can somehow still see them standing there. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again next time here on Witness.